In the reading community, so much is made about what authors you should read and which authors are the best ones for you, but something that's often overlooked is the best publishers. So today on the Life on Books podcast, we're going to be talking about our favorite indie publishers. Hopefully you'll learn about some new publishers you didn't know about before. Welcome back. My name is Tony. With me as always is Andy, aka Metafictional Meathead.
Good morning, Tony.
Hello. So, we have a lot to talk about today, but as usual, we will start with our weekly reading update. What do you got going on in your reading life?
Well, since we both have pretty good stacks of books with us today, I'll keep it short. Still chipping away at The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, and The Tunnel by William Gass.
There's the DeWitt book.
Yeah, which I'm enjoying. Starting to make a little bit more sense of,
cool.
Especially after our live chat this week.
Yep.
I read Distant Star by Bolano, which was really good.
Nice.
Kind of an expansion of one of the biographies of in Nazi literature in the Americas.
Cool.
It was kind of cool as I wouldn't really call it like an introduction, but a little preface. It was kind of meta. It was like, in my book, Nazi Literature in America, I wrote about this person and blah, blah, blah. And then my friend, Arturo Bolano, was not satisfied and thought there was more that I could have said. So we sat down for a month and a half and hammered this all out. And,
nice.
So that was cool, but it was a really good book. And then I'll probably talk about this a little bit more because it is a book from one of the publishers I brought with me today. But I've been reading Fury by Clyo Mendoza.
Very cool.
Translated by Christina McSweeney.
That sounds right.
I think.
I have it in my pile, so we can.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, talk about that. Yep.
But I'm really, really enjoying that. I've got about 30 pages left.
Cool. It's a pretty fast read.
Yeah. It was my lunch break book this week.
Nice.
Because, short chapters.
Yep.
Pretty easy to bang out.
Yep.
15, 20, 30 pages.
Yeah.
It was a little, I wouldn't say hesitant at first, but it kind of gets off to a bit of a slow start.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it gets really wild.
It gets really wild, especially once you start connecting the dots and
Yes.
who all the characters are and how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
And it does kind of have that fever dream feel to it at times. So.
It's also one of the most vulgar books I've ever read. It's there's a lot of disturbing topics.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. So, and I also started reading Anamnesis. I think I'm pronouncing that right, by Caroline McManus from Incastellated Books is the publisher.
Is that the one that you sent me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That our good friend Kevin, HV Book Nerd, just sent me. I'm about 100 pages in. It's pretty interesting. Structurally, it kind of reminds me of the Mystery.doc. I know I sent you a picture of the little kind of title page.
Yeah.
Where it says it's typeset to look like a fucking TikTok.
Nice.
But it's kind of all about AI.
Oh, interesting.
And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can really get into a succinct explanation of what it is, but
yeah,
I think you might actually enjoy it. So,
I mean, I like TikTok.
Yeah,
so.
We know. I'll send you a picture of the kind of synopsis that McManus wrote about what the gist is.
Cool.
So
sweet.
But it's really cool, and you should check it out.
All right.
It's a small independent publisher and a small author that should get more shine.
Cool.
Which fits perfectly with today's theme.
I love it.
That's everything I got. I'll shut up now.
All right. So I too am currently reading Last Samurai, in case that didn't pull focus before. Really enjoying it. Fun book. Interesting, different.
Yeah, very unique and fun.
Yeah. Pretty easy to read, I think, overall. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know about that I have to stop to look up because I'm just curious, but I don't think that's 100% necessary to do. So you could just kind of fly through it if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think part of it is the I wouldn't say any of the knowledge that either Sibylla or her son have is obscure, but they are both kind of erudite.
Yeah.
which to say the least,
Yeah.
which is, kind of the point. So
There's a lot of references to like literature that I have heard about, but
Yeah.
I don't know really anything about it.
yeah. And
Especially foreign stuff. Like,
right. Yeah. And I think like you were saying, like you don't need to stop and look up everything.
Right.
Sometimes I think if you have the gist of like, oh yeah, he's reading a lot of stuff from like the Homeric era,
Right.
then you're good.
Yeah.
You kind of recognize the titles or the authors, so to speak.
Yeah.
You're probably okay.
Yeah. Also reading Essays After 80 by Donald Hall. This was given to me as part of our Secret Santa for our book club. Shameless plug if you want to go join our book club. The link is below. This guy is a poet from New Hampshire,
Oh, cool.
where Andy and I reside. And he's since passed on since writing this book. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of just like reflections about being an old dude, which is cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. Since I'm not 80 years old, I don't know what that's like.
It's kind of a cool cover.
Yeah.
Kind of what either one of us could look like in.
Yeah.
Oops.
Nah, don't worry about it. Yeah, I'll probably look like that in 5 years.
It's a cool bookmark.
Oh, dude, wooden bookmarks are what's up.
I aspire to look like this.
Right, I aspire to live that long. If I make it to 50, I'll be doing well. Last night I started Endurance by Alfred Lansing, the very famous travel expedition adventure book, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage. So I think most people are probably familiar with this. Oh, I'm supposed to be marking these, so I know where to put the stuff. Most people are familiar with this, but it's about an expedition in 1915 to cross the entire Antarctic continent. So this guy had attempted to be the first one to reach the South Pole, and he failed. He got within like 90 miles of it, and then somebody like in the next couple of years did it, and he's like, okay, now I have to do something even bigger. And I'm not that far into it. I'm like 35 pages maybe. But I think it's funny because the expedition was literally set to get going at basically the exact time that World War I kicked off.
Oh, man.
And he had raised all this money. Obviously, he was taking this very capable ship, a huge crew of very capable seamen. And he was like, I don't know if like I should go. And so he like wrote to Churchill, who was the head of the... he was like the head admiral at the time, the admiral at I don't know what they called it, but to ask like, what do you want me to do? Like, do you want me to stick around and help with the war, or can I go on this expedition? They were like, no, go for it, bro. Like, go explore. And it's just kind of weird how much pride like societies took in that kind of thing at that time.
Yeah.
Because obviously there was a major global conflict happening. They were still just like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So, but so far it's great. And, I just finished Paranoia by Viktor Martinovich, who is a Belarusian author, and this is translated by Diane Nemec Ignashev. So this was originally written in Russian, and I mentioned this last week because I just started it last week, but I finished it, and wow, what an awesome book.
Cool.
Really cool book. You haven't read 1984, so the comparison won't hit as much, but it's effective. Like 1984 is written as a science fiction or a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic
Dystopian.
Yeah, dystopian. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. This is kind of like 1984 if it was just like real life modern day. And so it is kind of, it has a 1984-esque feel to it. And I would say like the story structure is also a little similar to 1984, but it's not, there's nothing science fiction about it. It's just like modern day Belarus and how insane it is to live there. Yeah. And this is from Northwestern University Press, who we'll be talking about today. So
cool. All right. Well, I guess I'll borrow that from you soon.
Yeah, it's awesome. Loved it.
Good to see neither one of us are following through with our goal of reading less books in conjunction with each other.
Well, so yeah, I mean, yeah, we failed on that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There's plenty of time for us to write right the ship and
Yeah.
get back on track. And
It seems worse than it is because I literally finished this and then Paranoia and then picked up Endurance right away.
Yeah.
And one of my goals for this year is to kind of read a little bit more nonfiction as I have the last 2 years. So
yeah.
But okay, so let's get into some of our favorite publishers, indie publishers. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of overlap here. So
Yeah.
we'll just talk about, we'll go back and forth publisher by publisher, and then just what we like about them and some of our favorite works from them. I see that you brought some books as examples. I pulled some off my shelf as well, but I'll probably bring up quite a few that I just didn't get around to taking off the shelf. So who do you want to talk about first?
So before I get into my stack, one of the things I noticed as I was kind of putting my list together and making things, obviously a couple weeks ago I talked about how one of my goals for the coming year or the new year is to read more of the books I already own. And it occurred to me that I've done a great job supporting indie publishers by buying their books, but I have not read as many as I would like.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been, spreading the love, and I have read at least one book from every publisher I'm going to talk about today. But we talked about this yesterday when we were kind of making our plans, and we're like, pick like 5 or so publishers and 1 to 2 books that from them that you've really loved. And some of these publishers I've only read one book, even though I have like a dozen of their books.
Yeah.
So some of these are books that, by default, but they are all publishers that I love and want to read more of. So,
and actually, before we start talking about the specific publishers, I do want to mention why indie publishers are so important and why they're usually a treasure trove of great books. And that's because these ventures typically get started knowing that they're never going to be these massively profitable businesses.
Yeah.
And even though the very large publishers, which now, in case you're not familiar, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago now, there was this basically huge collapse, I guess, lack of a better word, in the publishing industry where all of these smaller publishers or mid-sized publishers, I should say, kind of just became part of a larger conglomerate. So there's effectively 5 really big publishers now.
Yeah.
And then all of the other quote unquote publishers that you see on most books are just imprints of these larger groups. So I think it's like Simon and Schuster, Penguin Random House, Macmillan, and I forget the other 2.
Probably Harper and Collins.
They might even be an imprint at this point. I can't recall, but yeah, there's like 4 or 5 big ones.
Yeah.
And we had Chad Post from Open Letter on the show, and he talked about this, where even though those companies are making millions and millions of dollars, their profit margin is actually quite small. So it's like 3 or 4 or 5%, which for most businesses is like not good.
Right.
Most healthy businesses are going to have a profit margin of somewhere probably between 10 and 30%. If you're above 30%, you're like just printing money probably.
Right.
So if you're a small independent publisher, that you're not going to be making millions of dollars. Your profit margin is going to be that same 2 or 3%, but on instead of 2 and 3% on tens of millions or hundreds of millions, potentially, it's like maybe hundreds of thousands at best.
Right.
So these people are really in it for the love of the writing and the books themselves, which I think is important to have, because it's less of a question of commercial viability and more a question of, is it good?
Right. Yeah.
So.
And getting quality literature and lesser known literature out there, especially when it comes to works in translation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that they don't need to turn a profit. I mean, they do need to like stay afloat, but yeah. So, all right, let's get into it then.
Okay.
Who's the first publisher you would like to talk about?
Well, I guess since you mentioned him, Chad, I will start with Open Letter.
Love it.
And I have 3 books of theirs that I brought with me today. There's a couple others that I have read from Open Letter, but I sent them off to friends and stuff. So these are 3 that I've most recently read from Open Letter.
Hey, Editor Tony here. I got some great news. I talked to the folks over at Open Letter Publishing, and because we feature them on this podcast, they want to offer our listeners 30% off all of their catalog up until the end of February of 2025. Just use code LIFE, that's LIFE, at checkout to get 30% off. And we don't get any commission or kickback for this. This is purely a benefit for you, the readers. So go enjoy the awesome books from Open Letter.
First, we have Death in Spring by Merce Rodereda, translated by Martha Tennant. We read this recently for our book club. It was a big hit, I think. I liked it, at least. I brought The Taker and Other Stories by Rubem Fonseca, translated by Clifford E. Landers. These are short stories translated from Portuguese. Death in Spring was Catalan. I should have mentioned that. This was super cool. These are some pretty bonkers stories. It's got a blurb on the front from Pynchon, too. So,
damn.
Apparently they were like pen pals.
Wow.
Fonseca and Pynchon.
20 minutes.
Which is
Their
super
first
cool.
Pynchon mention.
Yeah. And then the last one I brought is The Red Handler by Johan Harstad, translated from Norwegian.
This is a very nice looking book.
Yeah, that book is super fun. It's so... So Johan is, I have to remember because, so Johan is the guy that wrote it, but it's all about this Norwegian author, Frode Brandengegen. Brandon, I don't know. I'm not even going to try.
Those are tough, yeah.
Yeah. But so Freud is a fictional author that wrote these invented micro novels and invented this character of the Red Handler, who's like a detective PI type. And the micro novels are like 4 or 5 pages each. And you can see, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but you can see the chapters are like a paragraph.
Yeah. Makes sense for a micro novel.
Yeah. But they're all like heavily annotated. So the micro novels take up about half of the book, and then the other half are all the annotations and the endnotes and stuff. But the endnotes are part of the novel.
Oh, cool.
They're like the biography and stuff of the guy that wrote the micro novels.
Yeah.
Like you'll be reading something about, the Red Handler will be after something, and then you'll check the annotation, and it's like a 3-page diatribe about the guy and his relationship with his father. And it took me a little bit longer than I care to admit to realize that was the concept. But the micro novels themselves are super easy to read. Obviously, they're not very long, and they're not super dense either. And they're just kind of fun and campy. And then the endnotes are really interesting, but super fun and unique book. So highly recommend that. But those are some books from Open Letter that I love.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Open Letter is attached to the University of Rochester, effectively acts as their kind of press, and they specialize in works in translation. And I probably have read more from Open Letter than any other publisher that I'll talk about today, but I just grabbed this one book off the shelf because I think it really encapsulates what Open Letter is all about, and that is The Brother by Rein Raud. And
it was an awesome book.
Yeah, you read this, right?
Yeah, you loaned it to me.
Yeah, and translated by Adam Cullen, and it's from Estonia. So the reason why I think this kind of embodies what Open Letter is all about is they have a lot of stuff translated from languages that you just don't see a lot translated in English. Obviously, when it comes to works in translation, there's a lot of Russian, there's a lot of French, there's a lot of Spanish, whether it be Spain or Latin America. But some of these kind of smaller countries, you just don't see a lot of the works from there translated into English.
Yeah.
And so Open Letter's got a ton of that. Obviously, this being an example, it's from Estonia. And this is such a weird, quirky, different type of book that you just don't see a lot of being published in general.
Yeah.
And Open Letter's got a ton of stuff like this.
Right.
So this is kind of a spaghetti Western almost.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of, not something that you and I typically would read, but it's really fun. The writing is quite beautiful, I would say, in parts. And it's just so off the beaten path of what we have here normally readily available to us in the States. That's what I really love about Open Letter. Some other books that I should have grabbed, Natural Causes by Nina Lykke. She's Norwegian. That was a book that I read last year that was just so unique, very fun. It's about a woman who she's a physician, and she's kind of going through some marital problems, and she's in her doctor's office where she sees patients. She's got a skeleton to demonstrate, whatever on the human body, and she has these discussions with the skeleton, and so it's just kind of fun. Yeah, you and I both read Winter in Sokcho by Elisa Dusapin. That book is very wildly popular, actually. That's probably their best-selling book ever, I think Chad had said on the interview we did with him. So that's kind of another unique book. There's so much.
What I like about them, too, and this is true of other publishers that we've talked about in the past or might even talk about today, with the doing all the works in translation, you kind of mentioned it, there's a lot available translated from Russian or from French or Spanish, and more so, on the Spanish side of things, they have offerings from a wide variety of Spanish-speaking countries. They've got Mexican authors, they've got Argentine authors, they have other Latin American authors, they have Catalan authors, which are Catalonian authors, which is a kind of a dialect of.
Nope. It's its own language.
It's similar. Please don't hurt me, internet. But you kind of get to see the language is the same, or at least very similar, but you get to see, and there's larger cultural aspects that are the same or similar, especially throughout the Latin American countries.
Yeah.
But you get to see the unique stylistic and cultural differences between a Mexico and an Argentina or Chile and Argentina, things like that. You get just kind of these different flavors.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day when I trained at Risto Sports, the owner of that gym was Bolivian, and he brought in a lot of Central and South American athletes to train there. And there was a distinct difference to my ear between Mexican Spanish and Guatemalan Spanish and Colombian Spanish. I mean, I couldn't hear it and say, oh, yeah, that's Colombia, but I could distinctly hear the difference when they were talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of colloquialisms and things of that nature that are different from one region to the next.
Yeah.
So,
and I think most people would probably be are probably aware that there are differences. I think most people would know in America, we all, well, I shouldn't say we all, but like, English is the primary language.
Yeah.
But English in New Hampshire is much different than English in the bayou of Louisiana.
Yeah.
So you get kind of that, but, reading works in translation from those different countries, even if they're all translated from Spanish, you get to experience those differences in flavors firsthand. So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And a lot of it, you are kind of at the mercy of the translator. Obviously, they can water it down and just give you the very literal translation or translate it into the most generic phrasing of a certain sentence or whatever. But I think a good translator really does help to capture the essence of what the original text is trying to say. So
Absolutely.
okay, so you went with Open Letter as your top pick there. I'll jump right in to New Directions Publishing. And right here I have one of my favorite books from them, which is Love and Terror by William Herrick. Good luck finding a copy. Apparently it's pretty much unavailable. It's on back order from the publisher and not really available anywhere online. So New Directions, they publish a lot of really interesting stuff. For example, William Herrick, who is an American author, but kind of forgotten. Like, I've never heard anyone talk about this guy other than you and I.
Yeah.
And I literally had no idea who he was before I bought this book. I think New Directions was having some type of 30% off sale or something.
Yeah.
And I saw the cover and I'm like, okay, it's a person holding an AK-47. It's called Love and Terror.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. Read the description. I was like, yeah, this sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And
I think I overlooked it when I bought some books from that sale. And then you were like, you and I were talking about the books that we bought.
Yeah.
You were like, yeah, I got a copy of that. And I was like, oh, I didn't even see that one. And I went back and read it and I was like, yeah, this is going to be a good one.
And actually, I don't know if you recall, but when we read it around the same time, and I was kind of like a little on the fence about it, but then by the end, I was like, this book was incredible.
Yeah. I think I was the same way. Like it starts off, I wouldn't say it starts off slow, but there's some setup and then it kind of just it blows up. And it's awesome.
Yeah. And I recently read another book by them, which was a Croatian translation, On the Edge of Reason by Miroslav Krleza. And that book was fantastic. So
New Direct, they're one of the publishers I brought today, so I'll just jump right in there.
Who do you got from them?
So one of the things they also do a lot of is works in translation. They don't necessarily specialize in it like Open Letter does. They've works in English. They have works from translated authors. They are the English imprint for two of my favorite authors, Clarice Lispector. I brought Near to the Wild Heart with me because it was the first one I grabbed. And then they also publish all of Laszlo Krasznahorkai's work in the U.S., and I brought Satantango, which was his debut novel. Was not the first work of his published in English, but his first novel, period.
Gotcha.
But yeah, they're great. They do a great job of like towing the line between kind of avant-garde, transgressive fiction and keeping with the idea that fiction is supposed to be fun and enjoyable.
Yeah.
So you get stuff that's unique and different and experimental at times and maybe really dark and weird or gritty, like a Love and Terror. There's lots of, Krasznahorkai's work that's very bleak and kind of full of despair. Mm-hmm. Or like the blurb on Satantango, profoundly unsettling. But they're all really enjoyable reads. Like you're not just like, oh, this is just an author showing off how clever they are or how dark they can make a novel. There's a lot of enjoyment you get out of them. So that's really cool as well. And I have a ton of books from New Directions. I've read a good number of them, mostly the Spectre. Let's see. They have published a couple of Fernanda Melchor's books. Actually, I think they've published all of her translations in the U.S. at least. I think Fitzcarraldo Editions does the UK editions of Melchor's work. But then, let's see, another Evalio Rosero. I've read Tono the Infallible by them, which was dark and kind of fucked up, but a good read. For a while, they published a ton of Bolano's books in English in the U.S., so they do a ton of great work. I mean, they're awesome.
Yeah. Shout out to New Directions. I think they probably have maybe the most I don't know. I was going to say maybe the most diverse catalog of anyone that we might talk about today, but we'll see.
Yeah. Oh God, what was the other?
Yeah, I've also read, I think, The Hospital by Ahmed Bouanani. My copy of that, I believe, was an NDP.
And they brought back The Obscene Bird of Night.
Oh, right.
By Jose Donoso last year.
You read that, right?
I did read that. I would like to reread it because I was really enjoying it. And it's around 500 pages, and I was about 2/3 of the way in. And then circumstances conspired against me.
Right.
And I finished it, but I was not as present in the final 2/3 of the book. Or 2/5 of the book. But that was another one that was, the writing was great. It was a really enjoyable experience, but it was also very dark and bleak and kind of made your skin crawl at times. So,
yeah, that was written in the 70s, right?
I think so.
It's kind of almost like a horror.
It kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
I think I at times kind of described it as like a dark, twisted, psychotic Garcia Marquez. Kind of had like magical realist tendencies to it, but it all skewed towards just like really dark and gritty and bleak and psychologically twisted. And it was really, I think it was he was kind of, Donoso was kind of publishing works at the same time as a lot of those Latin American boom authors.
Yeah.
But didn't get as much prominence, probably because of the subject matter of his books. Probably more one of those, like, you got to be in the know. Like, you kind of fall, you read Fuentes or Garcia Marquez, and then you kind of fall down the rabbit hole of like wanting to read more Latin American authors. And
Is he Chilean?
I think so. Let me look that. I don't really have much else to say about New Direction, so I'll look that up if you want to talk about your next.
So the next publisher I'll bring up is Transit Books, and the book I have here is At Night He Lifts Weights.
He is Chilean. Donoso was Chilean.
Oh,
sorry.
Cool. Kang Young-suk, and this particular collection of short stories was translated by Janet Hong. So on the topic of publishers we've only read one book from, Transit falls into that category. Although I don't have a ton of their stuff on my shelf, I have maybe 4 books. One of them being I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. And that book is wildly popular.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about that. They also have published a lot of Jan Fosse's work. Yeah. I've read Septology. I read a Shining as well, which is another Transit publication. Dalkey has put out some of his work as well, as has Fitzcarraldo Editions.
Did you bring any Transit books with you?
I did not. I could have. Yeah. I loved Septology, and I have 2 or 3 other books of theirs that I haven't read yet. Kind of the same thing as Open Letter. They specialize in works in translation, and they have stuff from everywhere. So, and they're a pretty small publication as well.
I've talked about this before, but their like book quality, like the physical quality of the paper and whatnot, is quite good. It just is a really nice feeling, tightly bound book.
Yeah.
So that's always nice to see. I mean, obviously, with these smaller publishers, as we mentioned, the budgets aren't huge, so they try to some cost savings here and there. I mean, none of these books I would say are bad quality, but certainly this is
Transit's got some great quality. Symptology is it feels great. You know, sometimes, unfortunately, with those bigger books, like it can be out of the publisher's hand. You know, if they're not doing the printing themselves,
right?
They're kind of at the mercy of what's available.
Yeah.
And those big books are costly to print. So it is fortunately easy to kind of be like, well, I'm going to print this 800-page book. Like, we'll go with a slightly lesser quality paper, or the cover material won't be as nice. But it's a great feeling book. It's awesome.
Yeah. What was the book that I think there was somebody, Seth was talking about it. There's like a big book that's coming out, but it's like going to be crazy expensive to print. Is it Schadenfreude?
It might be.
Yeah. But that's the thing is like people don't understand is like.
Or he might have been talking about when Dalkey did Arno Schmidt with Bottom's Dream.
Maybe that's what
Chad, I think Chad was talking about that too. But that one, I mean, that's a huge book, not just in length, but in like height and width and everything. That one, from everything I understood, was crazy expensive to print. Antagony from Dalkey was crazy expensive to print.
Yeah. And that's what people need to understand a lot of times is like, yeah, you could print it, but to even break even on it, the book might need to be $40 or $50.
Yeah.
And what's the market for people buying a $50 obscure work in translation?
I think when Dalkey originally put out Bottom's Dream, and it's hardcover too, I think it retailed for like $75.
Yeah, that's insane.
But
that's a very limited market for sure.
Yeah, and it's a very limited readership. So like the people that wanted to read it, like that's a price they're going to pay.
Yeah.
And it, I think they printed 2,500 copies, and I've heard through the rumor, maybe it was from Chad that told us this, but like 500 copies just kind of went missing.
Jesus.
But it's like, it's a tough one to find for like less than $200 at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think I read a statistic that the overwhelming majority of books published never sell more than 100 copies. And I think a lot of that number is probably the way it is because of self-publishing.
Yeah.
But I also think Chad kind of told us when we had him on the show, like if a book sells 1,000 copies, like that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And so that's the other issue too, is that if you order more copies as a publisher to be printed, you'll get a better deal, but then you have to sit on this inventory that might not sell.
And you got to pay storage costs.
And you got to pay storage costs. So it's a tough business for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Transit Books, definitely looking forward to reading more from them. They have a great catalog.
Yep.
Who do you want to bring up next?
All right. Up next, I will talk about one of the more unique publishers I've read books from. That would be Corona Samizdat. I brought 4 books from them, just so you can kind of see, because they do kind of big, full-size books, and they do these super cool pocket books. So 2 books that I've talked about a lot on the show, America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots by Philip Friedenberg, with visuals by Jeff Walton.
That green copy is so awesome.
Super fun and unique and bonkers experimental.
Yeah.
And plus, Phil and Jeff are super cool guys. I found about Corona Samizdat through this book. I found out a lot about the online book community through this book. This was kind of one of the first off the beaten path, lesser known, hardly known books and publishers that I found out about when I joined the Bookstagram space.
Mm-hmm.
Just super cool. And then another book I've talked about a ton, A Bended Circuity by Robert S. Stickley. Just one of the best written books I've ever read, and a great narrative, unique, an interesting narrative to boot. And then I brought over a couple of their pocketbooks as well. The Wolf Leaps by Chandler Broussard and Wailing Madness, Shame, and Death by Wade Gavin. Hold a couple. Let's see. Hold a couple up. You can kind of see the disparity in size between the two. But yeah, Corona Samizdat, super cool. Rick Harsh, the editor and owner and shipper and everything. He's a wild guy. He's super cool and unique. He's very well read, and definitely has a love for literature, especially, lesser known stuff. But what I think is so cool about Corona Samizdat is, they publish stuff that, like, I don't think many other publishers would, and kind of give some free reign to the authors and really unique stuff. Like, I know at least a couple of books that they've published. Rick has just, like, not even read the book or, like, a sample. Like, someone will just reach out and be like, "Hey, I've got this. I'm working on it. Here's the deal." And Rick is like, "Great, let's do it." But I think they're really cool in that they give small authors that might have a hard time finding representation at, like, a bigger publishing house a chance to get their work out.
Yeah. Rick sent me a couple books recently, and one was from Chandler Broussard.
Yep.
Raging
Joy, Sublime Violations.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And I sent him a message that said, "Hey, thanks for the books. Andy wants to know where his hat is, though." And he sent me 2 voice messages, and I forgot to listen to him. So let's listen to them right now. If they're terrible, I'll cut them out.
Mr. Merritt is going to have to pay attention. I told him that when we're done with the film, and we are in post-production now, when we're done with the film, I will send him the hat. The hat is here. I may have to use it during post-production to recreate certain aspects of scenes or, maybe transitions. If he wants to ruin the whole thing, he can't. I'm sending him the hat no matter what, unless he moves and I don't have his address, in which case I hope you'll tell me and I'll send it to you to give to him. So he's going to get the hat no matter what he does, no matter how badly he behaves. His misbehavior is nothing to me. He's getting the hat because he asked for it.
So there's one more here, and then we'll give you the context. Wait, no, maybe that's the whole thing.
I think you paid even. I think I'd remember if somebody just said, "Hey, I want these books for nothing." It's one thing to give away free books, but I do kind of require an order first. So hopefully that was the case, and you only got what you deserved. Well, I don't know. You probably you work hard. You might deserve more than what I could give you. I'm not sure. I don't know, but keep it up. Keep it up. You're a steady man who does good work.
So that is Rick Harsh, the owner of Corona Samizdat, and he's referencing what's the film they're working on?
I honestly don't know the name of it.
We've talked about this before. What is it about, though?
I
know what it's about. Like,
it might have been a conversation you had with Rick separately, because I don't think you and I have sat and talked about this film that they're working on. But so for some context, for anyone that does not follow Rick Harsh on Instagram or YouTube, he posts a lot of videos, mostly him just kind of talking into the camera.
Yeah,
sometimes
off the cuff.
Sometimes it's about a book that doing promo for a book that Corona Samizdat is about to publish or has just published. Sometimes it's him talking about a book that he recently read. Sometimes it's promotion for some other ventures that they're working on, like this movie that he just talked about in the voice messages. Sometimes it's him talking about the political state of the world. He's a very outspoken guy in those matters. And in one video, I believe it was on his Instagram, he was talking about how needs to get more viewership on his YouTube page. And, because he posts, obviously you can post much longer videos on YouTube. And in that video that he posted on Instagram, he was wearing a very cool and unique hat. And I jokingly said, how many fake YouTube profiles do I have to make and subscribe to amzn.to before you send me that hat? And since then, every now and then, I've made some good-natured ribs at Rick about when he's going to send me that hat. I'm not in any rush, Rick. I love you. I appreciate it. I'm not going to just sit here and beg for it. I don't want to sound ungrateful.
Well, that's what we do here on the Life and Books podcast. We beg for things.
Yeah. So it's just some good fun back and forth between Rick and I.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for whenever that hat comes in. I was going to, but I pretty much have to wear it on the show at least once now. But yeah, amzn.to is awesome. Rick is awesome. Most of the authors they publish, like you can just find on Instagram. They're happy to talk to you about things. Let's see, Zach Tanner is another one of the authors. He does a lot of the typesetting and cover design as well for most of their books. Jeff Bursey, Lee D. Thompson, David Vardaman. I could go on and on. They're awesome.
Just go browse their catalog. I'll put a link to amzn.to's website. They've got a lot of very, very unique stuff.
Yes, for sure. And I got a lot of Rick's books is available as well. And I talked about this before on a previous episode. I don't remember which one it was, but since I've started kind of following them and things like that, their website is kind of a recent development, or at least being able to order books through the website is a recent development. They'd have their catalog listed, but they didn't really have a shopping cart set up. So you'd see the books you want, and then you had to like send Rick an email and send him money via PayPal, and then just kind of sit and wait and hope that your books showed up.
Yeah.
Not that Rick is going to scam you and take your money. He's a very reputable person and will get you your books. But it did kind of have that air of like, what am I doing? Sending money to a stranger in Slovenia. And getting books that are just like, the package. I joked about it before. It looked like, if you watch any sort of movie about like our cartel or narcos or something like that.
It looked like you could stick a knife into it and some white powder would come out.
It looked like something I should not have gotten shipped to work. It looks like some contraband.
I mean, it's well packaged though.
Yes, absolutely. So and Rick kind of alluded to it in one of those voice messages you played. He is very well aware of the high postal costs of getting something from Slovenia to the U.S. So one of the things they offer that's really cool, if you buy, 2-3 books, whatever, and the weight is kind of between limits, Rick is usually pretty generous and will throw in a pocketbook or two, depending on how many books you order.
Yeah.
So if you buy a few books and you want some more, send Rick a message and he will see what he can do to stuff some extra goodies in your package.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to 7 Stories Press. You mentioned this book earlier. This just happened to be the one I grabbed off the shelf because it's one that I've read from them, which is Fury by Clyo Mendoza. She is a Mexican author. And yes, this was translated by Christina McSweeney. So 7 Stories is probably a little bit apart from some of these other publishers we talked about today, because their big thing, in addition to doing a lot of translated works, is very political type of publications. I guess what you would probably call leftist or progressive. And no, for anyone that has somehow stumbled upon this podcast and has been brainwashed into a false dichotomy of Republican versus Democrat. When I say leftist, I do not mean Democrat. I mean actual leftist. So some, pretty out there political theory and literature, although not all of their books are of that nature.
Yeah.
I think in general they just publish stuff that's maybe considered a little bit more on the fringe type of side. So, for example, I have a book from them called Hamas by Paula Caridi, and she's a historian who lives in the Israel-Palestine region and has just written about the conflict there, and I think gives a pretty unique perspective on what's happening there that you probably aren't. Well, you're certainly not going to get on mainstream media here in the States.
They've also published a bunch of stuff by or about Che Guevara.
Yes.
So
yep.
there's some more insight into there.
Yeah. But Fury specifically is kind of a magical realism, surrealist Mexican folklore combined with the political conflicts and strife and culture of Mexico. It's just a really strange but fun book.
Yeah. Well, so 7 Stories is one of the publishers I brought over today. They are specifically one of the ones that I mentioned at the beginning where I have purchased a lot of books from them. I have not read a lot from them. I bought this book, The Jewish Son by Daniel Goebel. He's an Argentine author that is translated by Jessica Sikora. And I absolutely loved it. I've talked about it on the show a number of times before. Absolutely loved it. And so when I saw that they were having, like a 25 or 30% off sale for whatever reason, I bought a bunch of their books. I have another one of Goebel's books, The Absolute, that I have not read yet, but I am really looking forward to, both because of the synopsis and because of how much I loved the writing in The Jewish Son.
Yeah.
And someone else that has read The Jewish Son said The Absolute was really good too. So, but yeah, they're really cool. They offer, like other publishers that we've talked about that do works in translation, they offer from a ton of different areas. They've done
a lot of nonfiction. I would say probably more nonfiction than some of these other publishers that we've talked about.
Yeah. But they've got, works from Spanish-speaking countries. They've got Eastern European countries. They've got Asian and Southeast Asian countries. They've got works translated from French. They have Annie Ernaux's entire catalog. She was a recent Nobel Prize winner. I think they actually sell like a box set of all of her work.
Yeah, they also recently did a box set of Vonnegut, I think, too.
I think they have published his collected short stories.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. I don't know if they have any of other of his works. They might have some of his nonfiction writing, but
yeah.
I almost bought a copy of the Vonnegut at Gibson's recently, but it was a little bit more than I wanted to pay for a book that day.
Yeah.
Not that it's overpriced, because it's a huge book full of his every short story he's written. It's hardcover. It seemed like it was great physical quality.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to pay $45 for a book that day.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, 7 Stories Press. Check them out.
All right. Who do you got next?
So I have kind of a 2-for-1 because one of them is a publisher that went defunct for a while, and then a new publisher sprang up and then revived the defunct one. So I've got Deep Vellum and Dalkey Archive. Unfortunately, Deep Vellum is another one that I've just because they publish such cool works, I've bought a lot. I've only read Solenoid by Mircea Cartarescu, which was awesome. I did start at one point last year Texas, the Great Theft by Carmen Bolosa, which was, I believe, the first book they actually published. And I wouldn't say I disliked it, but it was not what I was really looking for at the time. I forget what else I was reading, and the Great Theft is not a very long book. but whatever I was reading was at the time was longer and dense, and I was kind of looking for something that just had a kind of a straightforward linear narrative, which Bolos's book does not. So I put it back on the shelf for another day, but that's a very cool, unique book. I don't know if it's out yet or if it's still forthcoming. They might have recently published it. But Deep Vellum is doing an anniversary edition of that novel. I think it has like a new foreword or introduction or afterword, and maybe some history about the publication of it and stuff like that. But they're based out of Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, they're unique because they have an actual physical store,
Yes.
bookstore, and then they also have the publishing side.
But they do a ton of. I mean, they've got most of it is in translation, I think, if not all of it.
Yeah.
But they've got fiction. They've done poetry. I think they've got some nonfiction as well. Just a ton of different offerings. Same thing again as other presses that specialize in works in translation. It's not just Mexico and Russia and France. You know, it's all of these different countries and languages. And
yeah, they're sending me a copy of Tram 83, who's from blanking on the author's name, but he's Congolese.
cool.
And last year they published The Anarchist Who Shared My Name by Pablo Martin Sanchez, translated by Jeff Diedemann. That made my top 10 for my reads last year, and that was a great book.
Yeah, and they've kind of got this long-term project going on where they're going to be publishing some very big works in physically long text. You kind of alluded to Schadenfreude. That's due out in the fall of this year, kind of the start of that project. They're going to be doing some more work from Carter Rescue. There's an Italian author whose name I cannot remember. They have they've published one of his short story collections, Clandestiny, and Archipelago Books published Distant Light by the same author.
I was actually surprised you didn't bring any Archipelago with you.
Again, kind of another similar one where I've read a couple of their books and have a ton of others that I haven't gotten around to.
Yeah. I think I have one book from them and I haven't read it.
I think I was strongly considering them, and I went with Corona Samizdat over Archipelago, just because I think Corona Samizdat is lesser known than Archipelago.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to recommend Archipelago, but I haven't read anything from them, and they're based in the UK?
No, they're in Brooklyn, I believe.
Oh, really?
They're definitely in New York.
Oh. Who am I thinking of then? Somebody was having a sale pretty recently, and you had sent it to me, and then I was like, oh, this is too expensive with the shipping because it's coming from overseas.
That was probably Charco Press.
Oh, maybe it was Charco Press.
Charco. So two more independent publishers that will get some shine today. Archipelago Books and Charco Press.
I think it was Charco.
Again, similar to other publishers we've talked about today, specialize in works and translation.
Common theme.
I have read one from Charco Press, Last Date in El Zapital, I think was the title. I sent that to Kevin. I have another one that I haven't read. I've got a ton of Archipelago books that I haven't read. The physical shape and design and quality of the Archipelago books are super unique. They're kind of like little squares, which is, especially if it's like a big book, it's kind of fun to hold and read. But yeah, Deep Vellum is going to be publishing a ton of works and big books in translation that, again, lesser known. They've kind of, as far as I can tell, teamed up with Andre from the Untranslated, which is a blog about these big, heavy tomes and great works in translation that are very popular, or the high mark of literature in the respective country in which it was written,
Yeah.
but not as well known outside of that region.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get more recognition in the Western world, so to speak.
And
then Dalkey Archive, a really well-known publisher that specialized again in works in translation and more avant-garde stuff that kind of went by the wayside with the passing of John O'Brien, and that Deep Vellum revived. So I brought two of their recent publications. Marshland by Otohiko Kaga, which made my top 10 from 2024. I've talked about a lot. It was an awesome book.
I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah, I think you will really enjoy it. And then American Abductions by Mauro Javier Cardenas, which I just got recently. Heard really cool things about this book, and it kind of fits into the Latin American kick I've been on lately. And this is translated by... Was this translated by someone? Maybe it was written in English. I think it was written in English.
That does happen from time to time.
But Cardenas is Colombian, I believe.
Yeah, and the original Dalkey, before they went away, published some awesome books like The Tunnel by William H. Gass, which I've recently finished, and you are currently wrapping up your reread of.
They had published some of Gaddis's work as well.
Yep. They're reissuing The Tunnel, the new iteration of Dalkey. They're doing an Essentials collection.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got The Saltweed Factor by John Barth from that sitting on my shelf. So they're doing a lot of cool things.
Yeah, and they're kind of similar. Dalkey's is kind of similar to what what I was saying earlier about New Directions. Works in English, works in translation.
Yeah,
kind of riding the line between avant-garde and just fun fiction.
Yeah.
Obviously very literary on both sides of both publishers, but I think sometimes Dalkey skewed a little bit more towards the avant-garde side of things. Not a critique in any way, just an observation. And, some people will probably like more of the avant-garde side of stuff. So, but yeah, I love Dalkey publishes some great books. I've talked about this before. Anytime you and I, or just myself, go to like a used bookstore, I kind of scan the shelves to see if I can find, Dalkey books. It seems like with the new iteration, they are republishing or making available, even if it's not part of the Essentials collection, a lot of their older works, but it is kind of cool to find ones that were like published during its heyday, and then you got the older edition.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a cool piece of literary history, if you will.
Yeah, you're the one that turned me on to the technique of scanning bookshelves by publisher.
Yeah,
which is actually a really smart way to do it because they're all easily recognizable by an emblem.
Yeah, right.
More or less. So I think most of us, when we go into a bookshop, we maybe are just looking for anything that kind of stands out for any reason, or particular authors. Oh, I recognize the author. Let me grab it. I've heard of this person. But that's kind of the beauty of learning a little bit more about these publishers and what they publish. Then you start to realize, like, oh, I've really enjoyed all 4 books I've read from this publisher. I'll probably enjoy more.
Right.
Or at least they're worth picking up and looking at.
Right.
And getting a feel for what the book is about. And so, yeah, I've taken to doing that as well. So usually we'll do multiple passes through a shop before I will leave, but one of those will be just scanning for a particular publisher. That's
like my go-to technique.
Especially in used bookstores, for sure.
And it's like I always do it at used bookstores. Unless I have particular authors or books that I am looking for.
Yeah. New bookstores will sometimes have a special display for a particular publisher.
Yeah.
But used bookstores, that's less common, I would say.
Yeah. But I also like it's kind of my I do it at new bookstores too.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a for me at least, it's kind of a litmus test to see what or how well the selection of what the bookstore authors is going to jive with my taste.
Yeah.
Because obviously, with a new bookstore, they're going to be selling a lot of stuff that's popular, that's going to sell well, which is totally understandable.
Sure.
And sometimes if you go into a smaller store, they're not going to have the physical capability and capacity to sell weird books from small publishers.
Yeah.
But if I go into a bookstore, especially like an indie bookstore, and see that they have a copy of Solenoid on the shelf.
Yep.
Obviously, I already have Solenoid. It's not a new edition. There's nothing different about the ones on the shelf compared to the one that I have. But I know they're probably going to have some other stuff that I might like.
Definitely.
And, even if I am kind of perusing the shelf and I see a book from, again, at a new bookstore where it's, the retail cost, if I see something from Dalkey or Deep Vellum or Open Letter, even if it's something that I'm not, super interested in and might wait until either that bookstore or the publisher itself is offering a sale, put it on the list for later.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of gives me that sense of like, okay, there's probably going to be something here for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's like my litmus test at any bookstore is seeing what they offer for publishers, and hopefully they'll have something from that publisher that I'm interested in.
Yeah. I have one more publisher to talk about, probably the most well-known and popular publisher on the list today, but still what I would consider an indie publisher, and that is NYRB, New York Review Books, and this is The Long Ships by Frans G. Bengtsson, which is, he's a Swedish
Sounds right.
author.
Balkan, Scandinavian, something of the sort.
And this was translated by Michael Meyer, not to be confused with Michael Myers. Yes, Bengtsson is Swedish. I've read a bunch of NYRB, probably close to Open Letter as far as the amount of books I've read from them. And I don't think I've really ever read anything from them that I didn't at least like.
Yeah.
Most of it I've loved. And I grabbed this book, The Long Ships, in particular, because it's one of my favorite covers. I just think it's an awesome
that is a great cover. NYRB, the Classics collection, they have great covers.
Yeah. And they also just publish a very wide range of stuff. So there's a ton of American literature that's kind of been like forgotten, that they've kind of revived, right? So like your Don Carpenter with Hard Rain Falling. You could make the case for Stoner by John Williams, kind of a darling of the online community now, but probably not really that popular for a number of decades and been revived by NYRB. They have works in translation like this, and this is a very fun book. It's about Vikings. Bengtsson has been on record as saying, I literally just wanted to write a fun story.
Yeah.
But then you can get more philosophical, complex, dense literature from NYRB, which I think is cool. So they really do have something for everyone. I don't think I've ever read anything from NYRB that isn't part of their classics collection. So they are publishing new stuff.
Yeah.
As well. But they're probably most well known for their classics, I think.
Probably.
I think I have one book that's like from their modern stuff.
I do as well. I just bought it recently at Gibson's. It's the author is German, and I cannot remember his name, but the title of the book is Star 111.
Oh, interesting. The book I have is, I think, called My Stupid Intentions, and I think it's an Italian author. But great publisher. And even though they're, like I said, maybe the biggest one on the list today, still a lot of people don't know who it is. So, pretty much any time I make a video about NYRB and I say NYRB, I'll get at least one comment, usually more. What's NYRB?
Yeah.
And it's like, understandable that people maybe have not heard of it, but also I've tagged it. So just maybe go take a look and figure it out. But appreciate you commenting. But yeah, I mean, so even though we kind of think of them as maybe like a bigger entity, like still a relatively unknown.
Yeah.
And just, I would say, consistently publishing like awesome stuff.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
they've got
what, 600 books in their classics collection?
probably, they've got Gaddis's 2 big books. They've got his collection of letters. They've got some work from Gas, both fiction and nonfiction.
Yep.
Yeah, they've got works in translation.
Yeah.
They've got
They
stuff
definitely-
that's like a little bit more well known that they kind of revived in new editions.
Yeah.
They've got a bit of everything for everybody.
They definitely seem to, when it comes to works in translation, I mean, I wouldn't say this is like across the board, but they definitely seem to go more for some of those, like we talked about, the popular stuff like French,
Yeah.
Russian, more of the European stuff. I don't know that they have a ton of like Asian literature and
They've
translation.
got some, and they've got some Latin American stuff.
Yeah.
But again, it's more established isn't the right word, but more like well known.
Yeah.
Languages or countries that you think about when like
Right.
reading books in translation.
Kind of the juggernauts of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, links to all the books that we mentioned and the publishers are down below. You can get most of these on bookshop.org or Amazon, or perhaps at, if you have a good indie bookstore near you, but all of them you can order directly from the publisher, which is always,
Yep.
probably the most direct way to support them. And if you have any questions about any of the publishers that we mentioned today, if you see something that catches your eye, shoot us a message because we may have read it. We obviously couldn't mention every single book we've read by each of these.
Yeah.
And if there's any that you think should have made our list that we don't know about, please let us know below. I mean, obviously, this is very heavy on works in translation, but I do think there's a reason for that with independent publishers. Like I said, they're doing it for the love of the art, and obviously these authors are writing in different languages and being published in other countries, and they might not even be that popular there.
Yeah.
So really giving a shine to some of these lesser known authors. There's so many great, smaller or mid-sized publishers that are out there that we didn't talk about, like McSweeney's comes to mind. But if there's anything you think should have been on the list or your favorite indie, let
Before
us
we
know.
close out, I've got a few more that I can list off that I didn't bring.
Sure.
Didn't have as much to talk about, but I still want to shout them out.
Sure.
Obviously, we talked about Archipelago books.
Yep.
And Charco Press.
Yep.
Coffee House Press is another one. They've done all of Mark Haber's books. I've read 2 of the 3 of those, which were great. And his newest book, Lesser Ruins, which I haven't read yet. I've heard nothing but great things about that.
Yeah, I keep seeing people talking about it.
And from everything I've read, like his work just gets better and better. Whiskey Tit books. They did Troll, which was one of my favorites of 2023. And they've got some other great books. Sandorf Passage, they're based out of Maine. They did The Case of Jem, which was one of my favorites from 2024, and they also specialize in lesser known works in translation. Who else is there?
Anxiety Press.
Anxiety Press, The Garden, one of my absolute favorites of 2024. They also did Miracle Boy by Jack Moody, which was another book that I didn't make my top 10 last year, but it was a great book. Let's see, Amphetamine Sulfate. They do a lot of like transgressive science fiction.
That's a publisher.
Yeah. They are based out of Texas, I believe.
Okay.
I haven't read anything from them. I have a copy of their book, Human Rights, which is like a collection of different authors that they offer, kind of like novellas and short stories and weird transgressive writing. It's a really cool. I'll send you a picture of it. Maybe you can like splice it in because it's just a cool looking book. Encastellated is, I think, a recent one that's popped up. there's probably more.
Yeah, I
that-
mean, like I said, there's a lot of them out there, all deserving of your attention.
which I think that, to be honest, that's one of my favorite things about being a part of this online book space. Even if it doesn't lead me to publishers that I read a lot of, but like you just kind of learning about all these like smaller things. And we've talked about it before, like, you know, how many books that are already exist and are published every year, like
Roughly 2 million.
right.
Yeah.
It's impossible to read everything or even know of every book that's ever been or ever will be published. But finding out about just the breadth of publishers that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lee D. Thompson, one of the authors that I mentioned from Corona Samizdat, whose book, A Pastoral I Did Not Bring With Me, was fantastic. He runs a press called Galleon Books that seems to do some really cool stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of awesome publishers out there.
Yeah.
And I always love learning more about them and spreading the love.
Yeah. So that's it for this week. I have no idea what next week's episode will be about, but if you want to join a fantastic community where we talk about all kinds of cool books like this, you can join us on Patreon. It's the best way to support the podcast. Link is below, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.